Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Melissa Siegel. I'm a professor of migration studies, and this is a channel about all things migration. Now, what we're going to do today is continue with our Snapshot series, where we zoom in on a specific country using the Knowledge Center on Migration and Demography's Atlas of Migration, and we take a nice snapshot of the general picture of what's going on with regard to migration in that country today. And today we're going to focus on France. So let's jump right in and get started. So what I'll do in this video is cover the population of emigrants and immigrants. We'll look at visas and residence permits issued, some asylum applications. We'll also look at one measure of irregular migration. We'll also look at citizenship and naturalization, some indicators also of social inclusion, and we'll round it out by looking at some indicators of education and employment. Now let's start off with looking at some indicators of immigration. So we're going to look at how many migrants, or what is the percentage of the population in the country that is a migrant. And if we look at France, we can see that 5.5% of the population is an international migrant from outside of the European Union, and 2.2% is a migrant from within the European Union. That means that in total, France has a population of close to 8% of its population that is an immigrant. And those are numbers from 2020. And that is the stock of immigrants in the country in 2020. Now let's look at flows. So flows are what's happening in one specific year with the number of people who have entered in a specific year and the people who have left in a specific year. If you're interested in more on the differences between migrant stocks and flows, you can check out my video on that right here, and I'll make sure to link it down in the description below. So in 2018, there were around 387,000 people that entered France. And 52% of those were people coming from within the European Union, and 48% of those were people coming from outside of the European Union. Then we can look at emigration, so people leaving France. And again, in 2018, around 300,000 people left France. And this was split between 72% of people leaving the European Union in general, so leaving France, but also leaving Europe, and 28% staying within the European Union. Now let's turn our attention to residence permits. And here you can see residence permits that were issued between 2016 and 2019. What you can see also very clearly is that the majority of residence permits that were issued in France during this period were for family reasons, so family reunification or family formation, as well as education, and then other reasons. Residence permits issued for work reasons really are the minority of the residence permits that were issued in general. But at the end of the year in 2019, if we look at the valid residence permits in general at the end of the year, you can see here that 40% were for family reasons and 47% were for other reasons. So these could be things like asylum seeking or refugee status, just as an example. Now we can actually turn and look at asylum applications in France. Here again, we can see between 2016 and 2019 that first-time applicants were mainly male, and we also saw more first-time applicants in 2019 than we saw in 2016. If we also look at the decisions that were made on these applications, you can see that the majority of the decisions were actually rejections. So the majority of these asylum claims were rejected between 2016 and 2019, with a smaller proportion being accepted on different grounds, so one on the Geneva Convention grounds and other types of subsidiary protections. Now we can look at one measure of irregular migration. So what we can do is look at the number of people that were told that they no longer had the right to stay in the country and they were supposed to leave the country. And we can look at that compared to the number of people that we know actually left the country. And what we can see is that there were very low numbers of actual returns or people who left France after being given a decision that they were supposed to leave. So between 13% and 15% of people who no longer had the right to stay or people who were ordered to leave France actually left. So if you subtract those two numbers, basically what you get is a group of people who probably have ended up in irregularity, so not having the right to stay, not having legal status in the country, but still being there. We can also turn to looking at naturalization and naturalization rates in the country, again between 2015 and 2018 this time. So what is naturalization? That is when someone actually decides and applies that they would like to become a citizen of the country. And of course, you have to go through a whole legal procedure and meet several different criteria for that to be able to happen. But here you can see between 2015 and 2018, the actual share of foreign citizens who've acquired citizenship, as well as foreign citizens who have acquired citizenship in that year. So the numbers are not extremely high, and you can also see the difference between EU immigrants and non-EU immigrants. And in many other countries that we've also seen in previous videos, so we have a number of other Snapshot videos, and if you're interested in those, please do check them out here. I'll also link them in the description below. What we see here is that many more EU migrants have gained citizenship than EU migrants, and that is because EU migrants already have a lot of the same rights as French citizens, but that's different for non-EU immigrants. So it is much more beneficial for non-EU immigrants to actually try to gain naturalization or gain citizenship in France than EU citizens. And you can see here again, across the board, more non-EU citizens are gaining citizenship than EU citizens. Again, it's not huge numbers in general. You can see the actual share of foreign citizens who have acquired citizenship. So in 2015, for example, it was only 3.6% of non-Europeans and 0.6% of Europeans. Of course, this has to do with the fact that there are a number of hoops that you have to jump through to get citizenship, and also not everyone wants or needs citizenship. Now let's turn our attention to some indicators of social inclusion. Let's start off with income, comparing nationals to EU immigrants and compared to non-EU immigrants. And what you can see here very clearly is that nationals have, in general, much higher income than either immigrant groups, but European immigrants have higher incomes on average than non-EU migrants. If we also look at overcrowding, so this has to do with the number of people who are living in one household. Again, you see the lowest overcrowding among nationals and the highest overcrowding amongst non-EU immigrants. Now let's look at the risk of poverty or social exclusion, both for adults and for children. And what we can see very clearly here is that the risk of poverty, both for adults and children, is less amongst nationals compared to immigrants, and immigrants coming from outside of the EU are those with the highest risk. Now we can look at education. And what you can see here is that we do see that nationals have the highest levels of education. So almost 40% of nationals have high levels of education, with only around 17% having low education. And this is different for other immigrant groups. So EU immigrants are slightly more educated than non-EU immigrants, but we do see that non-EU immigrants have the largest numbers of low education, still having a decent number of high education also. So 28% still have high education amongst the immigrants coming from outside of the EU and 30% from within the EU. Now finally, let's look at some indicators of labor market integration and what's going on the labor market. The most common ways of doing that are to look at employment and unemployment rates. Here we can see employment and unemployment rates by different age categories and split between males and females, again from nationals, from EU immigrants and from non-EU immigrants. And in most cases, we do see that the employment rates are different. What's interesting is that the employment rate of non-EU immigrants seems to be the worst compared to the other groups. They also have the highest unemployment rates. But what we also see is that in some cases, actually, EU immigrants might be looking a little bit better on the labor market with regard to employment and unemployment. If we look at long-term unemployment, here the numbers are not so different. And in some cases, nationals even have higher rates of longer-term unemployment. Now, if we look at this by different educational categories, so if we look at employment rate by educational attainment, taking low education, middle education, and high education separately, what we do see here is that we do have higher employment rates actually amongst immigrants from a lower educational attainment background compared to nationals. It looks also a little bit similar at the medium education level. At least here we see that EU immigrants and nationals look very similar, with non-EU immigrants having a bit worse outcomes on the labor market. And we see a similar story with regard to higher levels of education, but on higher levels of education, all groups do see higher rates of employment. Now, I hope that just gave you a quick snapshot of what's going on in France today with regard to migration. We have a number of other snapshots also on the channel, so if you're interested in those, do please check them out. As I said, I'll link them in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please do like it, subscribe to this channel, and click that notification bell so you don't miss any of my videos that I post every week. And I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.